The March rain hammered against my windshield as I pulled into my driveway after spending 2 hours at Liam's grave, and that's when I saw the moving truck parked directly in front of my house. My house. The house I bought with my own money 3 years before I even met my husband Connor. And there, standing on my front porch like she owned the place, was my mother-in-law Diane Harper, directing 2 young movers who were carrying boxes out of my home through my front door without my permission. She didn't even flinch when she saw me. She just checked her expensive watch like I was interrupting her schedule. My name is Autumn Hayes. I'm 29 years old, a high school art teacher, and for the past 11 months, I've been living in a nightmare that no parent should ever experience. I lost my son Liam to leukemia when he was only 6 years old. For 3 years, I watched him fight with every ounce of strength in his tiny body. I held his hand through chemotherapy sessions that left him too weak to stand. I sang him to sleep on nights when the pain was so bad he couldn't stop crying. And exactly 11 months ago today, I held him one last time as he took his final breath in the pediatric oncology ward. The only person in the Harper family who truly understood my grief was Connor, my husband and Liam's father. He was different from his family. Where Diane was all cold calculation and social climbing, Connor was warm and present. He rejected his mother's constant attempts to control our lives. He built a career as a physical therapist on his own merit, and he never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. But his mother made sure I felt that way constantly. Diane never approved of me from the beginning. I wasn't from the right social circle. My parents were working-class people who taught me the value of hard work. I bought my own house with money I saved from teaching before Connor and I even got engaged. In Diane's world, that made me suspicious. A woman who didn't need a man's money was a woman who couldn't be controlled. But Liam's death changed everything. Connor collapsed under the weight of grief in ways I couldn't reach. He stopped talking. He stopped eating. He moved through our home like a ghost, and within 4 months of burying our son, he wrapped his car around a telephone pole on a rainy Tuesday morning. The police said he fell asleep at the wheel. I knew better. My husband died of a broken heart, and I was left alone with a family that had always seen me as an outsider. I stepped out of my car, still holding the fresh sunflowers I hadn't left at Liam's grave because a groundskeeper was repairing the headstone. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold rain. Diane walked toward me with that smile she uses when she's about to say something cruel but wants you to thank her for it. She announced, without a trace of shame, that they were converting that depressing little room into a nursery for Blake's baby. She said Connor's younger brother and his wife Cassidy were already picking out furniture. Soft green apparently. Gender neutral. That depressing little room was Liam's room. My son's room. The room where I read him bedtime stories and rubbed his back during bad nights. The room where his artwork still covered the walls and his favorite stuffed elephant still sat on his bed. And Diane was emptying it like he never existed. Before we continue, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications because what happens next will show you exactly how far a mother will go to protect her child's memory. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about a woman who was pushed too far and decided to push back twice as hard. Stay with me until the end because the moment Diane realizes what I've done is absolutely worth the wait. I need to tell you how I got here. How I spent 11 months letting Diane Harper slowly tighten her grip on my life without fighting back. Because I wasn't always this passive. Grief does strange things to people. When Connor died, I stopped functioning. I don't mean I was sad. I mean I forgot how to exist. Some mornings I couldn't remember why I should get out of bed, so I didn't. I stopped answering my phone. I stopped checking my mail. The school gave me a leave of absence that stretched from weeks into months. Diane started showing up about 2 weeks after Connor's funeral. At first it seemed helpful. She'd bring groceries. She'd check on me. She'd ask if I needed anything. I was so desperate for any connection to Connor that I accepted her presence without question. Then the suggestions started. Small at first. She mentioned how the house was very big for one person. She said Connor would have wanted me to think about my future. She wondered out loud if maintaining such a large property was really practical for a teacher's salary. I didn't realize she was building a case against me. 3 months after Connor died, Blake and Cassidy announced their pregnancy at a family dinner. Cassidy stood up, clinked her glass, and looked directly at me while announcing that finally there would be new life in the Harper family again. The way she emphasized new life made it clear what she thought of my grief. I was stuck in death while they were moving forward into life. Diane cried happy tears. Connor's father Raymond just nodded approvingly. Blake beamed like he'd accomplished something extraordinary, though from what I could tell he mostly just showed up. That's when the visits became more frequent. Diane would drop by unannounced to check on me. She'd walk through my house commenting on how empty it felt. How the extra bedrooms were just collecting dust. How Liam's room especially seemed like a shrine that was preventing me from healing. I should have seen it coming. But grief had made me blind. Last week, Diane called to tell me about a family meeting. She said they needed to discuss Connor's estate. Her lawyer would have documents ready. She expected me to be there. She expected me to simply agree to whatever they'd decided. I went to the meeting in their massive house in the wealthy part of town. The dining room was set up like a business presentation. Diane sat at the head of the table naturally. Raymond positioned beside her like a loyal supporter. Blake and Cassidy sat across from the empty chair meant for me, with Cassidy's hand resting on her pregnant belly like a constant reminder. Diane had prepared a presentation. She actually had a folder with documents and charts. She explained that Connor had been the primary earner in our marriage. She had bank statements showing that his income had paid for most of our household expenses over the years. Her lawyer had advised her that this created a legitimate claim to equity in my home. She was offering to buy the house from me at what she called fair market value. She slid a paper across the table showing her calculation, which was somehow $60,000 below what any real estate website would tell you the house was worth. As a gesture of goodwill, she continued I could live in their guest house while I looked for something smaller. Something more appropriate for a woman in my situation. Raymond added that this seemed like what Connor would have wanted. Diane said she thought I might be happier somewhere I wasn't constantly reminded of my losses. I sat there listening to them divide up my life like I was already gone. Blake wouldn't look at me. Cassidy kept smiling at her belly. Diane pushed a pen across the table and told me to sign tonight so they could handle everything else. I looked at the pen. I looked at the contract. I looked at Diane's expectant face. Then I stood up, left the papers on the table and walked out without saying a single word. That was 5 days ago. Today I came home from visiting my son's grave to find them emptying his room. I stood in my driveway watching the movers carry boxes out of my house. Diane was explaining to me, in that patient tone she uses when she thinks she's dealing with someone simple, that Blake and Cassidy needed space for the baby. Their apartment was too small. My house had all these extra rooms just sitting empty. Liam would have wanted his room to go to the family. She said this. She actually said that my dead 6-year-old son would have wanted strangers to erase him. One of the movers looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing at his truck like he was calculating how fast he could escape this situation. Smart man. I asked Diane very calmly who gave her permission to enter my home. She laughed. She actually laughed and said that Raymond had a key from when they helped Connor with some repairs last year. She said they were family and the family didn't need permission. I told her to put everything back. She ignored me. She turned to the movers and told them to continue loading the truck. That's when I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Diane's face went pale. She rushed toward me trying to grab the phone, but I stepped back. I told the dispatcher very clearly that there were intruders in my home removing my property without permission. I gave my address. I confirmed that yes, I wanted to press charges for trespassing and theft. Diane started yelling that I was being ridiculous. That she was family. That I was making a scene over nothing. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers. They asked to see identification. They asked who owned the property. I showed them my deed. My name only. Purchased in 2020, 2 years before I married Connor. They asked Diane to explain her presence. She sputtered about family rights and helping me through grief and how her lawyer had said they had a legitimate claim. The older officer looked at her and said very flatly that unless she had a court order, she was trespassing. He told the movers to put everything back exactly where they found it. Diane's face turned red. She demanded to speak to the officer's supervisor. He said she knew people. Her husband played golf with the police chief. The officer was not impressed. He gave her 2 options. Put everything back and leave or be arrested for criminal trespassing. Blake finally found his voice. He tried to smooth things over, saying there had been a misunderstanding. Cassidy looked horrified, probably imagining how this would look on social media. It took 40 minutes to put everything back. I watched every single item get carried back up my stairs and placed back in Liam's room. His toy chest. his bookshelf, his small desk where he used to draw pictures of dinosaurs and spaceships. The officers waited until everything was returned. Then they escorted Diane, Raymond, Blake, and Cassidy off my property. Diane turned at the door and said I would regret this. She said I was burning bridges I couldn't rebuild. I closed the door in her face and locked it. Then I walked upstairs to Liam's room. Everything was back but wrong. The blankets were folded differently. The stuffed elephant was facing the wrong direction. Someone had touched my son's things with careless hands. I spent the next 3 hours putting everything back exactly right. The way Liam liked it. The way it was supposed to be. When I finished, I sat on the floor of his room and cried for the first time in months. Not sad tears. Angry tears. Tears that burned. Diane thought she could erase my son. He thought I was too broken to fight back. She thought grief had made me weak. He was wrong. The next morning, I did something I should have done months ago. I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Patricia Morrison came recommended by another teacher whose family had tried to contest her inheritance. Patricia had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in family disputes. I sat in her office and told her everything. The attempted home purchase. The invasion of my property. The 11 months of pressure and manipulation. I showed her my original deed. I showed her bank statements proving I'd been paying the mortgage from my own account since before my marriage. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me and said 7 words that changed everything. They have no legal claim whatsoever. The house was 100% mine. I purchased it before marriage. The title was never transferred. Connecticut law was crystal clear. Marital assets are only those acquired during marriage. Everything I owned before Connor was separate property. Even if Diane tried to claim Connor's income gave them some equity, she'd lose. I had documentation showing I'd continued paying the mortgage from my teaching salary throughout our marriage. Connor's income had gone to other expenses, but the house payments were always mine. Patricia said she could prepare a cease and desist letter demanding Diane stop all contact regarding the property. If they violated it, we could pursue harassment charges. But I told Patricia I wanted something more. I wanted to make sure Diane could never try this again. I wanted consequences. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. She explained that what Diane and Raymond had done by entering my home and removing property could be prosecuted as burglary in Connecticut. Even with a key, entering without permission with intent to remove items met the legal definition. I had options. I could press charges. I could sue for emotional distress. I could file for a restraining order. Or Patricia suggested I could do something smarter. She asked me about Connor's estate. Has it been fully settled? Were there any outstanding issues? I told her Connor hadn't updated his will after Liam died. The original will from 2019 named me as primary beneficiary and Liam as secondary. With Liam gone, everything came to me automatically. His life insurance. His retirement accounts. His personal property. Patricia asked if Diane knew about the life insurance. I said probably not. Connor had purchased a substantial policy through his work. $500,000 with double indemnity for accidental death. The insurance company had ruled his car accident was unintentional, so the payout was $1 million. That money had been sitting in an account for months while I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Blood money, I called it. Money that existed because my husband was dead. Patricia's eyes gleamed. She asked if Diane had ever explicitly claimed Connor's assets belonged to the family rather than to me. I remembered the family meeting. Diane said Connor had been the primary earner. Her implying his assets should be shared with his family of origin. Patricia said that was perfect. She could work with that. Over the next week, Patricia and I built a strategy. Not just to protect my house, but to make sure Diane understood exactly who she'd been underestimating. First, we filed a formal police report about the trespassing incident. Even though the officers had handled it at the scene, having it on record was important. Patricia made sure the report mentioned the emotional distress caused by the violation of my son's memorial space. Second, we prepared a comprehensive cease and desist letter. It formally demanded that Diane, Raymond, Blake, and Cassidy stop all unsolicited contact with me. Stop coming to my home. Stop calling. Stop making claims about my property. The letter cited specific Connecticut statutes about harassment and trespassing. Third, and this was my favorite part, we prepared documents for a lawsuit. Not filed yet. Just ready. We calculated damages for emotional distress, violation of privacy, and attempted theft. The number was substantial enough to make Diane's lawyer very nervous. But the real weapon was something else entirely. Patricia discovered that Diane and Raymond had been claiming Connor as a dependent on their taxes for the last 3 years. Even after he died. Even though he hadn't lived with them or received financial support from them since he was 22. Tax fraud. Not major fraud, but enough to trigger an audit. Enough to create serious problems. Patricia also found something interesting about Blake's business. He ran a small construction company that did a lot of work through government contracts. Those contracts required specific insurance and bonding. If Blake got sued for any reason, even in a family dispute, it could jeopardize his ability to maintain those bonds. We weren't going to use these things unless we had to. But having them ready felt like armor. The cease and desist letter was delivered by certified mail on a Monday morning. Patricia sent copies to Diane, Raymond, Blake, and Cassidy at their home and work addresses. No way to claim they didn't receive it. My phone started ringing within an hour. I didn't answer. I'd changed my locks the day after the trespassing incident so they couldn't just show up. Instead, I got text messages. Dozens of them. Diane, this is ridiculous. We're family. You can't just shut us out. Blake, Mom is really upset. Can we talk about this like adults? Cassidy, I can't believe you're doing this while I'm pregnant. This stress isn't good for the baby. I blocked all their numbers. 2 days later, Patricia received a call from Diane's lawyer. He wanted to negotiate. Patricia told him there was nothing to negotiate. My position was simple. Leave me alone or face legal consequences. The lawyer tried to argue that family disputes shouldn't involve the courts. Patricia reminded him that his clients had committed criminal trespassing and attempted theft. If they wanted to avoid courts, they should have thought of that before entering my home without permission. The lawyer asked what I wanted. Patricia said I wanted exactly what I'd always had. My home, my privacy, and my son's memory respected. If the Harpers could manage that, we'd have no problems. The lawyer said he'd talk to his clients. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a letter taped to my front door. Not from a lawyer. Handwritten. From Diane. She wrote that I was destroying the family. That Connor would be ashamed of me. That Liam would be disappointed to see his mother acting so cold and vindictive. She said I was being selfish, keeping a whole house to myself when Blake and Cassidy needed space for their baby. She ended by saying that if I didn't reconsider, I would find myself very alone. The family would have nothing to do with me. I would have no one. I read that letter 3 times. Each time I felt a different emotion. First shock. Then it hurt. Finally rage. He was using my dead son. She was using Liam's name to manipulate me. Claiming he would be disappointed in me for protecting his memory. That letter was the biggest mistake Diane ever made. I scanned it and sent it to Patricia. Then I wrote one response. Just one text from a temporary number Diane wouldn't recognize. You used my son's name to manipulate me. That was unforgivable. Watch what happens next. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Then I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I opened Connor's life insurance account and I looked at that $1 million. Blood money. Money I'd earned by losing everything I loved. I'd been treating it like it was cursed. Like touching it would somehow betray Connor and Liam. But I realized something at that moment. That money represented Connor's love for me. He'd bought that insurance to protect his family. To protect me. Using it to defend myself and honor our son's memory wasn't betrayal. It was exactly what he would have wanted. I called Patricia and told her to file the lawsuit. All of it. Emotional distress. Trespassing and attempted theft. I also told her to prepare an anonymous complaint to the IRS about Diane and Raymond's tax fraud. And to quietly let Blake's bonding company know he might be involved in pending litigation. Patricia warned me this would escalate things. This would burn every bridge with Connor's family permanently. I told her to light the match. The lawsuit was filed on a Friday afternoon. By Connecticut law, they had 30 days to respond. But the real damage happened much faster. Blake's bonding company called him Monday morning. They'd received concerns about pending litigation. They needed documentation proving the lawsuit wasn't related to his business practices. Until they received that documentation, they were suspending his ability to bid on new contracts. Blake's business depended on those contracts. Without them he had no income. The IRS audit notice arrived at Diane and Raymond's house on Tuesday. Routine audit, the letter said. But it requested documentation for the last 5 years of tax returns, including verification of all claimed dependents. Diane called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. She left voicemails ranging from angry to desperate to threatening. You're ruining Blake's livelihood. How can you be so cruel? The IRS is auditing us because of you. This is insane. Connor would never forgive you for what you're doing to his family. I saved every voicemail. Patricia said they could be used as evidence of continued harassment. Wednesday, Diane showed up at my school. She actually came to my workplace during school hours. Security called me to the front office where Diane was demanding to see me. I came down with the school principal, Mr. Chin, beside me. Diane started yelling the moment she saw me, calling me vindictive, cruel, a disgrace to Connor's memory. Mr. Chin told her to leave immediately or he would call the police. She ignored him and kept yelling. He called the police. Diane was escorted off school property and given a formal trespass warning. If she returned, she would be arrested. That incident got reported to Patricia. We added it to the harassment documentation. Thursday, I received a letter from Blake and Cassidy's lawyer. They were offering to settle. They would agree to never contact me again if I dropped the lawsuit and agreed not to interfere with Blake's business. Patricia called me to discuss it. She said we could accept and be done with this. We'd achieved the goal of making them leave me alone. But I remembered Diane's handwritten letter. I remembered her using Liam's name. I remembered her saying he would be disappointed in me. I told Patricia no settlement. We go to court. Patricia asked if I was sure. I said I'd never been more sure of anything. The civil lawsuit was scheduled for a preliminary hearing in 6 weeks. But something happened before we ever got to court. Raymond Harper had a heart attack. Not a fatal one, but serious enough to require hospitalization. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. Diane was telling everyone it was stress from my lawsuit that caused it. Part of me felt guilty. Just a small part. The part that remembered Raymond had always been kinder to me than Diane. He'd defended me occasionally in his quiet way. But then I remembered he'd been there too. He'd stood by while Diane tried to steal my home. He'd held the key they used to enter without permission. He'd claimed Connor as a dependent on taxes to save money. He'd made his choices. I sent flowers to the hospital with a note, hoping for your swift recovery. No name. But he'd know who sent them. Diane called that cruel. She told mutual friends that I was mocking Raymond's condition. But those friends knew better. They'd heard what Diane tried to do. Word had spread through the community. The preliminary hearing happened on schedule despite Raymond's hospitalization. Patricia presented our evidence. The police report, the cease and desist letter, the continued harassment, the letter Diane had taped to my door, the incident at my school. Diane's lawyer tried to argue this was a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. That his clients had made mistakes but acted out of concern for me. The judge was not sympathetic. She looked at the timeline. She looked at the evidence of entering my home without permission. She looked at Diane's letter mentioning my dead son. She granted a temporary restraining order on the spot. Diane, Raymond, Blake, and Cassidy were ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. No contact by phone, email, text, or social media. No third-party contact through friends or family. Violation would result in immediate arrest. The judge scheduled a full hearing for 8 weeks to determine if the restraining order should be made permanent. Diane walked out of that courtroom looking 10 years older. Blake looked terrified. Cassidy was crying. I felt nothing. Just a cold, settled calm. The IRS audit concluded 5 weeks later. Diane and Raymond owed back taxes plus penalties for incorrectly claiming Connor as a dependent. The total was $28,000. Blake's business took months to recover. Some of his government contracts went to competitors while his bonding was suspended. He lost roughly 40% of his annual income. The full restraining order hearing happened in November, 8 months after they'd emptied Liam's room. By then, everything had fallen apart for the Harpers. Raymond's health had declined. The stress of the audit and lawsuit had taken its toll. Diane had aged dramatically. Blake and Cassidy had moved to a smaller apartment because they couldn't afford their previous rent without his full income. Their lawyer made one final plea to the judge. His clients had learned their lesson. They'd suffered enough. The restraining order was ruining their lives. Patricia presented evidence of why it needed to be permanent. The pattern of behavior. The manipulation. The violation of boundaries. The use of my son's memory as a weapon. The judge made the restraining order permanent. 5 years renewable. Minimum 500 feet distance. No contact whatsoever. If they violated it even once, they would face criminal charges. I walked out of that courtroom with something I hadn't felt in almost 2 years. Peace. That evening I went to Liam's grave. I brought sunflowers, his favorite. I sat on the bench nearby and told him everything that had happened. I protected your memory, baby, I said out loud. I didn't let them erase you. I promised I never would. A butterfly landed on his headstone while I was sitting there. It stayed for almost a minute, bright orange wings opening and closing slowly. Then it flew away into the November sky. I don't believe in signs from heaven. But I let myself imagine Liam was telling me he was proud. I drove home with the windows down despite the cold. My phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. A former client of hers was selling artwork and wondered if I wanted a first look since I taught art. I answered at a red light, scheduled a viewing, and pulled into my driveway. My driveway. My house. My son's room is exactly as it should be. No one could take that from me ever again. The lawsuit was settled out of court 2 months later. Diane and Raymond paid damages for emotional distress and trespassing. The amount was significant enough that Patricia took her fee and I still had money left over. I donated it all to the pediatric oncology ward where Liam spent his final days. In his name. A fund for families who couldn't afford to take time off work while their children were sick. The plaque in the waiting room reads, "The Liam Hayes Memorial Fund. In memory of a boy who fought with courage." Diane will see that plaque if she ever visits that hospital. She'll know exactly who put it there. Some people say I went too far. That I destroyed a family over a misunderstanding. That grief made me vindictive. Those people didn't see what I saw. They didn't watch their child die slowly. They didn't lose their husbands to sorrow. They didn't come home to find strangers erasing their son's memory. They don't understand that sometimes, the only way to survive is to fight back twice as hard as they hit you. I'm still teaching. I'm still living in my house. I'm still visiting Liam's grave every week with fresh flowers. And Diane Harper hasn't come within 500 feet of me in 3 years. That's all the revenge I ever needed. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight to protect something precious? How far would you go to defend the memory of someone you loved? I read every comment and your stories matter to me.